I went on a long road trip a couple weeks ago with my family because there was a family reunion, right? It's a 16-hour drive from here.
It's like for us going to Cape Town, basically.
Yeah, there you go. It gives you a lot of time to talk in the car. So I was talking with my husband and I'd been on a writing forum and I was trying to think something through. And so I just spitballed something, just some little sentence. But at the end of it, I said a phrase that I've heard people say since I started writing and I didn't quite understand it for like most of the last 10 years. But I said, that, but better. My husband looks at me and is like, what do you mean, but better? That was really good. What do you mean?
You do realize, we are our own worst enemy. And I think especially for creative people, because no matter how many times you edit a book, no matter how many times you write a phrase or rewrite a phrase, every time you go back, you're always going to want to change it.
It's so true. And that's what happened to me. I said, but I could say it this way or I could do it that way. And my husband just goes, Sarah, it's fine. You're not even going to write this like for real. So just leave it.
I think we should just have a t-shirt that says, but better. We have to work on ourselves. Be better.
We're so critical. But really, it was really bad. And I immediately thought of 3 better ways to do it.
Sure, Sarah, sure.
Well, today I am doing a cherry tea.
Ooh, look at you. Well, today I'm doing my homemade cafe mocha. It's like the best of both worlds because I get a little bit of caffeine and a little bit of sweetness.
And a lot of warmth.
There we go on this cold, cold day. Alrighty, are we ready for this episode?
We are ready.
Hey, let's go. Hello, welcome to Tea on Tales. We are so happy to have you here with us. I'm Madeleine Aynal.
And I'm Sarah Sampson. We especially want to thank Troy Logan and Deborah Birdwell Winkler for joining us each week. This week, we have our first ever podcast spotlight. One of the ways that we have found to learn about writing is through other writing podcasts. They're free, they're easily accessible, and you can reach a lot of great writers and professionals in the industry.
We were on her podcast as well. So if you want to check that out, we were on season 2, episode 5.
So please welcome today, editor Grace Erin of Between the Edits.
Hello, Grace. Welcome to Tea and Tales. We are very excited to have you here with us. Not only because we were on your podcast, Between the Edits, we can also talk about your journey as an editor because that is also what you do. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you came to this point in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I am so excited to be on the other side of the seat microphone. It's such an honor to be here. So again, thank you guys so much for having me on. Basically, my 2 main things that I do is the podcast, and then I am also a developmental editor. The editing came first. And so that came out of a desire to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. After college, I got a degree in something that I don't even use anymore. I wanted a break from school. And so I got like your standard kind of office administrative jobs because I'm detail oriented and very organized. And so those are definitely strong suits that are very marketable in that field. So I did that for a while. And then I realized that I needed to figure out like what was going to be my priorities in life. For me, that's definitely going to be prioritizing like family and home life. And I knew I needed to start investing in a career that would work well with that. And I wanted something that I could scale up or scale down, work remotely, that gives me that flexibility. But it's still something that I'm, of course, passionate about and find purpose in. I did a lot of research, wasn't even thinking about anything book related. I just loved books, loved reading, loved writing, but I didn't even think about that as a career option. I honestly don't remember how I finally had that light bulb go off, but it did. I realized I was like, wait a second. Like there's such a thing as a developmental editor who works on, big picture ideas and stories, themes, plot, characters behind every story. And that's something that I could do. So I researched what that would take, spent several months working on it, got a certification, continued doing education, and then decided to take the leap. I worked 2 jobs for a while to kind of build up, my clientele base and all that. But I've been very fortunate to be able to switch to doing the editing full time. In the beginning, I had some extra free time, right? I wasn't completely full time, but I was busy enough that I couldn't work my other job. So I switched to doing the editing and I was like, well, I still have a bunch of time. So then I was like, you know what I've always wanted to do is a podcast. And I was working with authors, helping with some marketing, things like that, just stuff to keep me busy, teach me about the industry, and get connected with people. And I was having conversations with them, and I was like, I think it's time. I think I'm kind of doing podcasts without actually putting the content out there. And so I should just do that. And so that's where Between the Edits was born. So between my time editing, I really love getting to talk with other people in the book world, not even just authors or people who work on books, but like bookstagrammers or cover artists or anything and everything book related. I just consider it all fair game. And so that's how the podcast was born, from a little bit of free time between my editing.
To me, having a good developmental editor is like gold, because your story, you can fix lines all day long, but if the development has an issue, there's going to be no reason. Like, you're going to have to redo all the other edits if you have to make a developmental change. We talk a lot about how beginning writers don't know much about the industry and need somewhere to learn. So when you started your podcast, how did that change from this idea of, I'm sitting here just talking with authors, to, okay, let's formally put this together? And how did that process happen for you?
In between editing and, trying to find clients and learn more about the industry and like connecting people with resources. As I'm sure like you guys know very well, when you get connected with somebody, they're like, actually, do you have any suggestions for this or any suggestions for this? And I was like, I just started developmental editing freelance and I don't have any idea what this process is. And I need to go find it out because I like being able to help people, like being a first point of contact, right? So I started offering marketing help essentially for ARC campaigns, advanced reader campaigns for independent authors. And obviously very popular online right now is going to be clips and video content. I still really love like the classic Instagram carousels where you get to make your own graphic design. And I think those are lovely, right? So we did both. I helped people design actual images for their Instagrams, but I also ended up interviewing the authors and then cutting that into clips and using that to help promote their art campaigns. I had like a 30 to 45 minute interview with the author all about their book. And then I would cut it into clips and only use like a grand total of maybe 3 minutes of that interview to promote their art campaign. And authors really loved that. I got a lot of positive feedback from the author and also just engagement on the platform. And so that was really cool. But I was like, I've got 30 plus minutes of excellent interview that is just sitting in my computer drive. So that specifically is where I was like, okay, maybe I need to take this and turn it into a podcast. But I knew that I didn't want the podcast to be limited by how many different art campaigns I worked on with an author. And so that's when I decided to not just make it ARC focused, but to open it up into like a very general book stuff kind of topic.
I love that you said that because in today's day and age, social media is such a big part of the book industry. That is mainly kind of how you get your book into the world. It's how people get to know you as an author and even editor and agent. I mean, so many agents are online right now. And I always love asking this specific question because we as podcasters, I mean, when we started out doing our podcast versus where we are now, like there's been so many challenges that we faced to be able to get where we are right now. And so what have you found has been some of the challenges when you started launching your podcast?
A big one was time investment because I was already interviewing the authors and then cutting that into clips. I thought I had an idea of, I was like, it'd be just simpler to take something I already recorded, I'm already cutting into clips and just post it for the podcast. But in the reality, there is much more that goes into it. And I know that was actually a point of discussion on the episode y'all did with me, where people don't realize just how much administrative work and production work goes into producing a podcast. So the time investment was something that surprised me. And I would say another one was just vetting the guests. Not necessarily that I've had any major issues with that, but I have found that there are people who want like the checkbox easy promotion. No shame or anything like that, because it's really, really hard to market your work. But I found that I struggled with some of those conversations because I felt like there wasn't like an equal investment on both sides. One of the challenges of keeping my podcast scope so broad and being able to talk to lots of different people is I had to figure out if I was talking with an author, if I was going to interview the author about their experiences or interview the author about a particular work that they want to promote. I do draw a distinction distinction between those two. And that was something that was really helpful for me to figure out kind of as I started getting into it, because you run into different issues depending on the approach that you want to take to the conversation. So I'd say those were the big three.
I loved how you say like vetting your guests, because Sarah and I have found it so true to be true, because there's been people who approached us to be like, yes, can we be on your podcast? And we don't know anything about them. And I mean, we have worked 2 years to be able to do our podcast. And so at some point we were like, okay, you know what? We can't just accept anyone onto a podcast. And I must say that has actually helped us a lot to stay true to our podcast and what we want to accomplish through our podcast.
Right. I'm a small pond, small fish. Most of the time it's just for authors. I don't really have the same, I don't think, issues with other types of content. But if an author reaches out to me, I give them the option. I'm like, hey, I take 2 approaches to an author interview. I can either talk about your journey as an author, if you just want to generally promote yourself, or we could talk specifically about a publication. If they choose the specific publication, they have to give me a copy of the book and I have to have time to read it. And then I give them a copy of my ethical alignment standards. So it's not like an arbitrary, like, no, this doesn't work for me and you don't get to know why. Like, I have to justify to them why they are in violation of something that I have pre-written. If there's content in books that I disagree with or what have you, and I don't want to specifically promote that work, they can always still do the author interview with me. I always give them that option. And I have had to enforce that, which, as your resident non-confrontational lady over here, it's been good. It's been good for me.
That process sounds like such a good process. I feel like we're going a little bit off of writing here into podcasting and having to vet people for a podcast. So if you're a writer trying to get into a podcast, what do you feel like is the best thing they can do as they approach you and say, hey, I'd like to be on between the edits? What sort of things should they send to you or say in that query? It's basically a query for you to feel comfortable bringing them onto your podcast.
Yeah. So you said it perfectly, like approach it almost like you're querying. If I feel like it is a generic, like, hey, I'd love to come on your podcast, and you don't even name the podcast, right? At that point, I question if it's even like a real person, just to be quite frank. So if I feel like you've at least like looked at the Instagram, right? Or looked at 30 seconds of a video, or something like that, where I feel like you've at least taken a look at my podcast and have determined it might be a good fit for you, that usually helps. But even then, like I mentioned earlier, my podcast is still very small pond, small fish. So really the biggest thing for me is if I feel like your email is genuine and you can at least name my podcast and seem to kind of have an idea of what we do. If you include links to your website, your socials, Goodreads listings for your book, if you are looking to promote a specific book, anything to kind of help me just quickly find that information. That's usually the work that I do anyway. If somebody reaches out to me, the first thing I'm going to go look for is their social medias, their websites, Goodreads, if they are a publisher or if they're published, and things of that nature. So just having that information right there in the email makes it easier for me. And it also lets me know that you're a real human who is invested in the opportunity. And so I still consider myself lucky to have you on the podcast. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to make the impression that you have to impress me and make me feel like I'm a big podcaster. Those little things that just make me feel like you are interested in my podcast specifically and not just, I said, a checkbox promotion looking for anyone and everyone kind of thing.
100%. Like for me, if you started an email to us and say, Dear T&Tail, sipping on writing, editing, and publishing, then I'm already thinking to myself, clearly you've never watched an episode, because in the beginning of every episode, we say what our names are. So then I'm just like, do you even know what podcast you are reaching out to? First of all. And second of all, it's on our website as well. But afterwards, if you actually have a clear statement to say, this is the person I want to be interviewed. This is the book that they have. This is a link to their book. These are the topics. And this is the important part. These are the topics that they could be discussing on your podcast. Because I love that, because then we can kind of figure out how it might work in a season or in an episode or something like that. But if you just come out and you're like, hey, I want to be on your podcast, I'm like, who are you? What do you want me to do with that information?
Love that suggestion. I think that's great, is if you come into the conversation with an idea already of what you are looking to discuss, anytime you can set expectations on either side of the discussion is going to be incredibly helpful. So from my perspective, I'm very clear about what my podcast offers and how I go about doing that and my approach. And so it's great when authors have that same kind of vision where they go into reaching out to me knowing that they want to discuss this book or this aspect, or even like when they would be interested in their episode releasing. Like if they are specifically looking to market something for a specific release date, that's super helpful information for me to know ahead of time, because we could go through the whole conversation of trying to get you scheduled from a podcast, and then I find out I'm not open for that release date. Clear vision, set expectations. You're exactly correct. That's super helpful as well.
I know that you spoke earlier about if someone reaches out to you, then you would ask them for an arc and give them two options. Are there any other things that you kind of look at when you decide to interview someone? Like, is there any like specific themes you're focused on, or any topics that you are like, no, we are definitely not discussing that on the podcast, or anything like that?
Yeah. So as far as like why I might exclude someone from being on a podcast, or a specific book or publication from being on a podcast, there's really only two main things that I'm ever concerned with, and that is explicit sexual content and then explicit violence for the sake of violence. If it's in there, I'm by no means like clean purist or anything like that. Like I, even in my own writing, can be very dark, but the whole point of it is to be redemptive in the end, to not glorify the darkness, to show light overcoming the darkness. And so if I feel like there is content in there that is in there just for the sake of like shock value that has no other purpose to the plot or the themes, those are things that I personally don't want to promote, so I won't promote them. And like I said, I have had to enforce that before, and it went very well. The author completely understood there's going to be different perspectives on those things. And that's why it was really important to me to make sure that I had those written out in no uncertain terms. And I send the same thing to every person that I go through this kind of conversation with, so that it's not an arbitrary statement of, well, I feel like this is this. It's like it's specifically written in my ethical alignment standards, so that there's no question there. If I'm promoting a specific book, that's the really big one, to be honest. For a person who is maybe not an author or not published and just wants to talk about something else related to editing or podcasting or cover art, all that kind of stuff, mostly that's just me digging through all of their online presence and the exchange of the emails back and forth, kind of the vibe I'm getting from them through those emails. Most of the time, I don't have the opportunity to meet them prior to the recording date, like do a pre-call or something like that, which would be cool, but I just don't know that that's all that efficient or effective. But other than that, it's looking at, do they have a LinkedIn? Do they have a social media presence? Do they have a website? Are there other publications? Like, do they have a blog that I can go and read some of their content through? And so it's just a lot of fact finding on my part.
I feel like you've had the opportunity to speak with a lot of very interesting people before your podcast. And since you've started it, is there one that is the most memorable or impactful episode for you, and why?
Okay, so peek behind the curtain. I loved this question that you guys kind of gave me some stuff to think about in advance, and this was one of them. And I loved this question. I thought about it for a little bit, and I kept coming back to an episode from this season. It has already been released by the time we're recording this. It's with Stephanie Solander, and she is a communications professional. She's had a couple of different jobs within that realm, kind of blending the lines between marketing and communications in various roles. But she was also a teacher, and I believe it was like at a college level for teaching adults basically writing skills. And a lot of it was creative writing. I don't know if it was all creative writing, but the reason why this one was so, I think, special to me and like stands out is because she is a friend of mine that I knew before I even started the podcast. And so we had my fiance and her boyfriend were in the same community orchestra. And so we would see each other at, briefly during practices if I were to attend or something, or at various gigs they had and at concerts, and we'd sit together and we'd chat, and we just kept coming back to books. And so I knew that she was a fan of like books and reading. And so that instantly made us like, good friends. I started getting into the editing and doing my podcast, and I heard more about her job and her communications. And I realized like how much crossover there is between taking, creative writing and then professional forms of writing, and how those skills are transferable. You just put a different flair on it almost. So it's special because she is just a dear friend of mine, and it was really fun to have that conversation with her. And she was so tickled when the episode came out. So it was really, really great to do that for her. Also because she is just so well spoken. I feel like her voice is so soothing. And so it was just a really fun conversation. That one's been one of my favorites so far, for sure.
I love that. I mean, when it's around, I started this podcast, we didn't really we've been in writers groups and things like that, but we didn't have like very many people to interview with. And so naturally we reached out to people who we knew. We were like, oh yes, you're a writer, we can talk to you. You're an editor, we can talk to you. As those seasons continued, we started reaching out to literary agents and editors and things like that. And you kind of get an idea of how to network, which is a big thing you learn in this industry. So, I mean, for us, when we look at our first episode in season 1 versus like our season 5 episodes, they are vastly different. Not in a bad way, it's in a good way, because I feel, as we continue with our seasons, we learn and grow as well. Doing your podcast, we know you're in season 2 right now, but many things can happen in 2 seasons, is what I'm saying. But has your vision for your podcasts changed since you first started?
Yes. So when I first started it, I was thinking that I wanted to run this thing, and like do the thing and like do it right. And, and of course I still feel very strongly about doing it right. But I think I got excited about doing something that had been kind of like a dream of mine for a while. Nothing that was like ever like a passion the way that like book editing or writing has been for me. But like, I was always just intrigued by the idea of doing a podcast. I remember I had tried twice, like 2 or 3 times in college with some friends, and like it never went anywhere because we were in college and and timing and schedules and all that. It was something that I was like intrigued with for many, many years. And so then when I first actually did it and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this, I got really, really excited about that. And I think I lost sight of the fact that it's supposed to be between the edits. I started noticing that with the time investment, the doing this podcast and trying to produce it the way that I wanted to was going to take more time that I was willing to take away from my editing hours. So I think that was one of the biggest things for me is I don't necessarily need to decrease the quality of my production, but I do think I am going to scale back the production a little bit. I might try to do like 1 episode per quarter. I haven't even figured it out yet, but essentially I want to give each their due time, and I can't straddle that fence. I'm not going to do that to my clients. I'm not going to do that to the fans of the podcast. I think that was probably the biggest thing for me is I got super excited. I didn't pace myself. There's wisdom in knowing when to slow down and figure out what your priorities are. And so this was always like the title of the podcast was Between the Edits. So I can't let it compromise my editing. That was probably the biggest thing that I learned just from my first, a year and a half now of doing it with 2 seasons out.
I feel like your balance, your work-life balance there is so perfect. How do you choose what topics and what guests make for a great conversation and bring those people in?
I haven't done like a season yet where I have tried this new spacing. I'm still wrapping up with the stuff I already recorded. So going into it, I imagine I'll probably have to figure out what my approach is going to be, but it probably won't be very much different from what I'm doing now. As an editor, I have to be online and market my presence and all of that. So I try to be engaged and spend a little bit of time scrolling on the old Instagram and threads and, all the stuff just to see what's out there. And if there's anything that flags my interest, I'll just take a closer look at it and send out some DMs, get to know people, look at their work. And so it's pretty much that. If I see something that interests me or I see other clips from other guests on other podcasts and things like that, and I think, oh, that's an interesting topic or something. Yeah, just making mental notes of those things. And I imagine I'm probably going to struggle with wanting to put out more episodes than I realistically have time for. I might get to a point where I have a long list of people and I'm just like, that I want to reach out to, but I haven't had to face that struggle yet. So I'll let you know in like another year.
The amount of like spreadsheets that we have with like topics we want to discuss and people we want to have on. And funny enough, at some point I told Sarah, I was like, I'm afraid we're not going to have episodes because like, are we going to run out of topics? Are we going to run out of people we want to talk to? Well, 5 seasons later, we're still like, finding topics to talk about.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, I mean, to be honest, like letting the work that I'm really passionate about, like the editing, fuel those kinds of decisions helps a lot too. So if there's something that I notice is a consistent thing that's popping up for authors that I'm working with, or frequent questions that I'm getting asked from them, or things that I come across in that line of work, like those are obviously applicable and things that somebody might be interested to know about. So from that perspective too, I mean, the work that I'm doing as an editor definitely helps me figure out kind of how I want to take the podcast approach.
That little post you did where you did a little video of like all the comments that you make for people when you edit their books. And I was like, that is so cute because I totally do that as well. But also it just kind of shows what type of editor you are as well, because you as the writer, I mean, that is your baby. So you want people to be engaged. And so if the editor is like, oh my goodness, no, why did that happen? Or like smack my face or something like that. But they also kind of be like, no, that was the wrong tense that you write there. It's very, very nice to have those little insights also because, between the edits, you are editing in between. So I think it's nice to show your viewers and your listeners. This is kind of also what I do besides doing the podcast. When you kind of approach an episode, how do you go about doing the episode? Do you have like a set list of questions you ask your guests, or do you have like specific questions depending on what the topic is you're talking about? Or kind of how do you prepare yourself for an interview?
So my process starts with, again, just researching the individual. And if they reached out to me or if I reached out to them initially, some of that probably has already been taken care of. I spend a lot of time looking at previous posts. I'll go back like a couple years, even if I can, like I'll spend some time looking at stuff just to see if there's anything in particular that I would want to ask them about or bring up. I know, especially with marketing, there's the need to just like be staying relevant, and posting a lot. So like within a year span, like you can go through lots of different information that somebody might, have on their socials and profiles and such. I try to go back, like a solid year from whatever I can see if there is that much to be seen on there, and kind of pull out some of the things that I thought were interesting, insights that they had, something that they published, things like that. I do kind of have a set list of questions that I am prepared to ask any guest that kind of just revolve around like, hey, what do you do in this book world of ours that we have? And so there's that set of questions. And that's always something that I am interested in asking anybody, regardless of their specific reason for being on the podcast. And then I come up with another set of questions. And when I say set of questions, I'm talking like 5 to 6, because, just depending on recording length, you might not get to all of them, and conversations can be fun and they go lots of different directions. So 5 to 6 questions that are set about just generally like, what do you think about this book world that we live in? And then 5 to 6 questions that are more specific to why I'm bringing them on. So if it's because of an author, it could be related to their journey or their publication. If it's an editor, it might relate to their experience as an editor. If it's a podcaster, their experience with podcasting. And so I kind of have 2 approaches to the questions that I ask them. And so I'd say that's the biggest one. I always make sure to give them those questions in advance so they have some time to look it over and think about it. I also send out like a Google form that has basically fields for them to fill out of like, this is the spelling of the name that I want. You might find my legal name somewhere else in X, Y, and Z, and I don't want that, published anywhere. Or this is my author's pen name. Please only ever use this name. Like making sure that I have all those ducks in a row, getting their socials from them directly so they type it up and it's not me pulling it and potentially having a typo. I still always double check those, of course, because typos are a thing, but having it directly from the author, I like to have them type out the socials that they want me to emphasize. And so that goes directly into the editing of the podcast. And then any topics that they are not open to discussing, I also make sure to ask that as well, because obviously I don't want anyone to feel like it was like a gotcha situation or I asked something completely genuinely and it ended up being, an uncomfortable topic for them. So those are the big things I would say that I do.
I love all of that so much. And a lot of that is lessons that we learned the hard way as we went, where you send questions to people and then they're like, actually, can we not talk about this? Can we just strike that off? Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm so sorry. I have known so many authors who have started things like a YouTube channel or a podcast, especially our nonfiction authors who want to build their platform. And one of the things that I thought of is that people can surprise you, even when you do all of that research, even when you do all the things that you do to prepare. They come on the podcast, and anybody who wants to start a podcast, it's something you'll experience, and they'll surprise you out of nowhere. Have you ever had the experience where you changed your perspective on a person or on their book after you were recorded the interview with them?
Yes, but only ever in a positive way, right? So I've never interviewed somebody where I left the interview and I was like, oof, So thankfully, it's all been really excellent. If anything, like I kind of mentioned earlier, one of the risks you take with connecting with people digitally, like through email or DMs, and then having them on the podcast is you don't really get to meet them before the actual recording. And so you find out like when you're seeing them face to face for the first time as you're supposed to be recording the content. And so the thing that's so special about that though is the face-to-face meeting is what really makes somebody come alive for you. Doing the podcast and like getting to see people face to face, they always just come alive in a way that you just can't get over emails and DMs. And even if they've got videos of themselves on their social media, and I've seen videos, it's different, right? It's different having that human connection. So I can't think of anyone in particular who like completely surprised me. There's definitely been cases where somebody has mentioned that they have experience with something that I did not see in all my research, or we have a connection like we've lived in the same state before, or they know exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about this niche book that I love. There's been things like that, elements like that for sure. But generally speaking, the surprises have all just been like just that human connection of talking to somebody face to face and being like, you're a real human.
Yeah, generally before we also talk to our guests, I love going to YouTube and trying to see if they've done interviews with other people before, just to kind of get an idea of like their personalities and how they will approach questions and things like that. But it's totally true what you say, because every podcast is approached differently and they have different hosts who ask questions differently and who, give different vibes to their podcast, they will act differently on your podcast, even if they've been on several podcasts before. Doing your podcast, have you learned anything about yourself that surprised you?
Yes. So one of them was all my filler words, right? Painfully obvious. The first time I watched back an episode, I was like, this is me? This is what I sound like? Yeah, so that one was the first cutting knife, but it's good. I think I'm getting better. The other one would be just feeling more comfortable being myself, which sounds very weird because you would think that I do go into podcast brain, right? I am there to host a podcast. And so it's not perfectly just me, casual conversation. Like it can't be. I'm there to host a podcast, lead a discussion. And so there's responsibilities with that. And so of course that changes my personality just a little bit as I'm approaching it. But just the practice of speaking to people that I've never spoken to before and learning about their lives and asking them sometimes personal questions, that has been an experience that just showed me that just being yourself really helps with those things. And so again, finding that fine line of still got to be professional, but giving myself the permission to just be a little bit more myself and letting that genuineness come through in the conversations. So that took me a little while to warm up to. And then kind of tangentially related to that is the idea that I am very introverted. I don't do well in big crowds. It's funny. If I'm talking one-on-one with a person or a small group, I'm golden, right? It's fun. I enjoy myself. Larger groups, not so much. However, I've noticed that since I started doing the podcasting and practicing these skills in kind of these situations, strategic extroversion does not have to compete with my comfort zones. I've learned how to kind of adapt the skills that I'm learning with podcasting to make me feel more comfortable and confident in larger group settings. So still not perfect, and I still need naps afterwards, but I have noticed that I've gotten better at that, and that has been a very surprising outcome.
I feel you on that introvert side. I love that, though, that we can learn that sort of things about ourselves and be able to be on a podcast, even as an introvert. You have a voice and you have opinions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to ask you your opinion. What advice would you give someone who wants to start their own podcast, but maybe has some of those insecurities?
My advice, which, take it with a grain of salt. Again, small fish, small pond. I would say think very deeply, spend a lot of time thinking about why you want to start the podcast. I think one of the reasons why the podcasts I had attempted to do with my friends in college, there's many reasons why that didn't pan out, but I think one of them was because I was chasing that feeling of wanting someone to listen to me, and that's never going to get you far. I think the reason why this time worked is because I had different motivations at the core of why I was doing it, and so I still enjoyed the podcast format, of course, always have, but this time was different. I think it was because I knew why I was wanting to do it, and it didn't have anything to do with hearing my own voice. In fact, I've learned that I don't like hearing my own voice. But yeah, so that would be my first thing is before you do anything, sit with it for a while and make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. And then my second would be to seriously consider production quality and the time investment that's required for that. Make sure you're prepared for that and you have time for that in your schedule. The other side of that same coin is to pace yourself. Again, you don't want to get burnt out on something and, do a couple of episodes and feel like you didn't do them well and then get frustrated and then stop. That doesn't serve anyone. It's certainly not going to serve your listeners and the people who enjoyed what you started. So pace yourself, think very deeply about your motivations, and really consider the time investment.
And can I flip that question a little bit as well? Take this full circle to the beginning. What if somebody wants to get into editing and wants to decide, hey, maybe I want to be a developmental editor. I love writing, but what if my real passion is editing? What advice would you give them?
Advice I would give them, I'll start with the same because I think it's great for anything, right? Anytime you embark on any new journey, first pause to consider your motivations and be very honest with yourself about that. You're not going to get very far if your motivations do not align with your values. The second thing I would say is specifically for developmental editing. I won't speak about copy editing, proofreading, and line editing because they have kind of different skill sets, certifications, all that kind of stuff. But for specifically developmental editing, I would say start off being a beta reader and do that for a little bit and get a feel for it. Look into certifications, read books about story writing, the craft of writing. Do all those things first before you start working with clients and investing that time into it. Because beta reading, it's not the same as developmental editing, right? But beta reading is kind of looking at story structure. Ideally, it's with a specific target audience. And so you can even figure out if you like editing the genre that you love, right? So be a beta reader for the genre you love and think about critically the story as you're going through when you're giving your beta reader feedback, which is different from developmental editing, of course, and to a certain degree, as far as the level of complexity and what you offer in return. You can figure out very well, when you're beta reading and you have that mindset on, go ahead and put on your developmental editor cap and the skills that you've been learning and approach beta reading from that perspective and see what you think. Go through that. I would say like 2 or 3 times before you even consider getting the certification and going that step, just to make sure that you are aware of what you're getting into as far as like the skill set needed and everything. Because I think it's easy to say like, oh, I'm helping with the book's development, but it's a lot more granular than that. It's like down to this specific scene and how this line wraps up this theme, and like all these things connect, and you have to keep track of all of it in your mind. I think beta reading is a great way to train yourself to see if you like thinking in those terms or if that's going to detract from what you actually love about the story.
I love beta reading. So now I decided I'm going to be a developmental editor. Thank you very much. It's very true. And I think also the other thing that you need to think about is that, yes, you are doing developmental editing because you enjoy it and you enjoy looking at the plotline and character arcs and all those things. But you also kind of have to take into consideration the person who is writing the story, because you want to give them the best help that they possibly need to make their book the best that they needed.
To tag on to that, I made a post earlier this year. It's like the things that I learned in my first year of developmental editing. Of course, you think about it, but again, not very specifically until you're approached with it, right? And you have to, deal with it in that context. If there is something in a book that you like personally disagree with, but the author wrote it well, like your job as an editor is to say, yeah, you wrote it well, or to help them write it better. So my job isn't to change the book to make it what I think it should be. My job is to honor the author's vision. So again, that's one of the reasons why it's important when I work with a client, I make sure I set expectations on both sides. And so there's less confusion or issues that pop up down the road. But yes, like if there's something in there that I'm like, I wouldn't write it that way, or I don't like that, or what have you, or I disagree with this conclusion if I'm working with somebody's personal essay. My job is not to change the theme or to change the point of the manuscript. My job is to help them bring that out better. And that can be hard for people. So if that's something that you would struggle with as like somebody who's interested in being a developmental editor or something, if you can't divorce your desire from the book from the actual like tangible objective, how do I improve the craft of writing for the author, then that's something that you would have to consider for sure.
That takes a lot of skill. Thank you so much, Grace, for joining us today. We thoroughly enjoyed everything that you had to tell us and all of your advice. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. It's, again, always so fun. I love you guys. So thank you.
And if you would like to learn more as our viewer about Grace, you can go to her website at www.graceerinedits.com. She also has a LinkedIn, Grace-Powers, or you can find her on Instagram, Threads, or Facebook at Grace Erin Edits, Substack also at Grace Erin Edits. So please go and look her up. And absolutely, go take a look at her podcast, Between the Edits. She has an Instagram at Between the Edits, and she's on YouTube. All of those links will be in the show notes for easy access. We like to keep things short here on Tea and Tales. Get your fingers back on the keyboard and your pens back on paper.
And if you like what we are doing here, if you love the guests that we have on, the topics that we are discussing, and just being our awesome selves, go follow us on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook at Tea and Tales Podcast, and on Twitter/X and TikTok at Podcast Details. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. And then go to that purple icon on your device and go to Spotify and like and share and comment and tell us what writer podcasts you have been listening to. And then you can help us go up at some moment.
Then join us next week where we will be speaking about the archetype of enemies to lovers and bringing on special guest author Eileen Canyon. Happy writing.
Bye.